What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for gunfighter life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics. Today, revolvers, all that stuff, the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Today we're going to talk about some of the best revolvers and what I would call different classes. What I would call a good defensive-sized revolver, big bore revolvers, and pocket or snub-nose revolvers. That's kind of what the categories that I thought of for this. Certainly there are many others, but I'm not really going to talk about the cowboy action stuff or anything like that. Double action, modern, defensive kind of revolvers. And what some of the best ones are today, and caveat that with they're like available new. Not ones that were available 20 years ago or things like that. The best new available that you could still get. I'll skip the normal bio. You've likely heard it before. I would say, though, if you enjoy this podcast, consider becoming a patron. Also, consider scrolling down, hitting some stars, leaving a review. And if you've listened to more than one episode, just make sure you're subscribed. With that, let's get in to today's topic, revolvers. I probably should do a whole other episode on revolver relevance. Some people would say, with the 365, what use is a snub-nose pocket revolver? Or with the modern, reliable fighting semi-auto, what's the point of a good defensive fighting-sized revolver? And to not go too deep down that rabbit hole, I'm just going to say I think there are very legit reasons for those. And again, that's probably a whole other episode. But there are many reasons why you might decide to have one or carry one or whatever the case is. So if that's you, what do I think are some of the best revolvers available today? Okay, so I said it had to be available new at the time of the recording. At least I think they're available at the time of this recording. And that's in the year of our Lord, 2023. And the one that got me thinking about this, that I'm so happy that they make, again, the Colt Python. You talk about a great all-around sized revolver. Now, like many models, that's why I tell you guys about the 3-year rule. When they very first got reintroduced, I think they had an issue or two. They seem to have worked that out. They've been out for a couple of years now. I don't remember exactly when they reintroduced them, but I remember seeing them at one of the pre-COVID SHOT Shows, so it's been a minute. And they're still around. They're still being produced. If you want a good all-around size, and that's what I'm talking about for a good all-around size, you may decide you want 3 inches or 4 inches or 5 inches or 6 inches. But in general, for a good all-around size, I would say that a good 4-inch, again, you could go plus or minus an inch on that, but a good 4-inch 38 Special 357 Magnum revolver is kind of your sweet spot for a great all-around defensive and or hunting revolver. And that's one of the great things about the revolver. You can go really, really hot with the load if you're going for more power for whatever your application, or you can go pretty mild to just regular, not even plus P, but just standard 38 specials. And that's a super versatile loading. Anywhere from really mild 148 grain, just wad cutter rounds, to 180 grain hard cast, like a buffalo bore or hand load, super heavy for caliber. You could go all the way, I think they go down to like 90 grain or something like that if you wanted to get really light for whatever application. Super low recoil. But all those in that mid-size, what you would think of as that kind of quintessential mid-size revolver. Again, the Colt Python, the Smith & Wesson K-frames, L-frames. Fantastic. And it just makes me happy that Colt Python is reintroduced. And I'm going to be honest, I think the Colt Python is one of the most beautiful of the handguns. Not just revolvers, just period. It's a beautiful gun. And I personally like stainless. I know a lot of people like blued. I like the look of blued when it's pristine, but I'm not a keeping a gun in pristine shape kind of guy. I like the stainless steel look. I like that they're making the new Colt Python. It's a good all-around revolver. That said, I wouldn't call it the best value. For the best value in that kind of fighting size revolver, I'm going to tell you, I think it's the GP 100. Ruger makes revolvers like tanks. They're just really sturdy. They're built really beefy. There's even in a lot of reloading manuals or some ammunition companies loads that they only recommend for like Rugers and similar revolvers because they're built so sturdy, so beefy. The GP 100 is the 357 Magnum 38 Special version of that. Just a beefy 357. And it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. It's not the most dirt cheap gun, but this is not, thrifty gunfighter podcast. If it's a gun to trust your life to, if you just want a 357 to go to the range, then yeah, get a Rossi or a Rock Island if you just want to see what it's like. But if you're going to carry it to trust your life, there's nothing wrong with a good value. That's different than being dirt cheap. The Ruger GP100 is a fantastic value. Again, for this I would pick the 4-inch size. That's a good all-around size, right? That was pretty much the standard for police officers. And again, you can go 3 inches, you can go 5 inches. 6 inches is good if you're going to lean more towards the hunting side of things, but as somebody speaking from experience, I found the 6-inch a little bit too long to be practical for carrying a lot all the time. I think that 4-inch range is really good. And the GP100 comes in that 4-inch range. And again, 38 Special 357 Magnum. Just one of the most versatile cartridges. Cartridge combinations, because you can shoot both out of it, right? But 357 Magnum is absolutely a powerhouse. People, I think, underestimate it because it's been around for such a long time. And the 10mm is kind of in vogue, and it's the cool guy cartridge that's come around again. It's kind of like the fanny pack or the bell bottoms of cartridges. It's starting to come back in vogue. And that's all well and good, but if you look at the ballistics of a 357 Magnum, let's say 180 grain hard cast, and look at the ballistics of the common loading of 180 grain 10mm, you'll see that the 357 Magnum is a powerhouse and should not be underestimated. It's a great cartridge. And it's one of the best crossover cartridges for hunting and defense. That GP100 is a good value. Built like a tank, beefy. Especially if you're into reloading and making your own ammo, which if you shoot a lot of 38 Special 357 Magnum, I would encourage you to get into that. It's one of those cartridges that really makes financial sense. You could argue the case for 9mm, whether it's worth it to reload or not, because it's so economy of scale, become affordable and reliable and easy to procure. But 357 Magnum is not that way. You can reload it quite a bit cheaper than you can buy decent 357 Magnum. And if you're going to reload, especially, the Ruger is very tempting. They're, again, just kind of built like tanks. And I like stainless, but you can get the blued one if you want. But a good 4-inch-ish GP 100 357 Magnum probably wouldn't be my choice. But if you said I could only have one gun, it wouldn't be a bad choice. Especially if you're talking about like not like zombies coming to pee in your radiator or whatever your version of the apocalypse is, right? Just things are pretty much the way that they are. Yeah, maybe inflation's getting worse or whatever, but in that kind of world where I still want to carry a gun every day and I can only own one firearm, that 4-inch size stainless steel 357 Magnum, that's a hard thing to argue against. Long guns are great and they're better for most things, but you can't generally have them with you all the time. Have them on you all the time. That mid-size 357 Magnum is a fantastic option. I have been blessed to do quite a bit of handgun hunting, and I would have no problem Now, it's more challenging. That's kind of why I love handgun hunting, because it's more challenging. But I absolutely wouldn't feel bad hunting pretty much anything in the lower 48 with a good load, assuming that I made a wise choice in my bullet construction and ammo selection with 357 Magnum. It's a phenomenal choice, and it's a great defensive choice. And getting back to that GP100, it's a phenomenal value in that. Really kind of robust, beefy, and in the stainless. Very forgiving of lack of maintenance, very forgiving of adverse conditions. You don't generally accessorize a revolver nearly as much as other revolvers, but it's a common platform. So they make a lot of aftermarket stuff for it. You want to switch out the front sight. You want to put an adjustable rear sight. You want to put different grips on it. It's a good value gun like that. Now the next one I'm going to talk about is probably just the best production if we're not talking about a super high-end like a Manhurin or something like that, or a Korth. Those are kind of in their own different class. But if we're talking a straight performance standpoint from a production gun, I'm going to have to go with Smith & Wesson. They've been making really good revolvers for a really long time. From a pure performance standpoint, unless you're talking about the beefiest of the beefy loads and a steady diet of those beefy loads, I'm going to go with a good middle-size Smith & Wesson. For me, the one that stands out is the Model 66. The Model 66 Combat Magnum. A really good gun. They still make it. You can still get it. As you might imagine, it's a little bit lighter than the Ruger. I do think they have a little bit nicer fit and finish. And again, talking about performance, as far as trigger pulls and things like that go, Smith & Wessons are really good. They're just really good. I think from a pure performance standpoint, this would probably be the one. I was going to carry day to day. If you said for whatever reason, you're mandated that you have to carry a revolver as your go-to concealed carry handgun, this is probably the one that I would go with. It's a little bit lighter. I'm very familiar with the Smith & Wesson, revolver triggers. This Model 66, a very good option to Combat Magnum. It's a good size. Again, it's that kind of 4-inch mid-size range. It's 36 ounces, so that's lighter than a 1911, and I get 6 rounds of 357. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll be honest, and this is in the eye of the beholder, but I honestly think the Ruger GP100 looks better and the Colt Python looks better still. But if I'm trusting my life to it, I care more about the performance side of it. So that Smith & Wesson Model 66, I think from a pure performance standpoint, and just Smith & Wesson, again, has been making really good revolvers for a really long time. So if I was going to trust one as my day-to-day carry, I'd probably trust that one. Again, unless I really wanted to load really hot for caliber loads, like I was mostly carrying it for that reason, I might lean towards a Ruger. But if not, then I probably would go. That'd probably be my one, the Smith & Wesson 66. A short caveat, if you want a little bit more firepower, if you're a capacity kind of guy, well then you're probably not a revolver guy. But if you're a revolver guy that wants more capacity, there is the 686 Plus, a little bit bigger gun. Now, whether you're going to be able to tell the difference between a K frame and an L frame, I don't know. But it does give you the extra round, that plus, that 7-round capacity. Kind of like that. I'm generally not a big fan of one extra round, but going from 6 to 7, is a lot more, I think, potentially important than going from 15 rounds to 17 rounds. So there is that 686 Plus, but going back to the 66, and this is kind of unique, and I think it's a good bridge to go from the kind of carryable mid-size fighting handgun that I think is a good all-around revolver to the big bores. And it's a big bore in a fighting size handgun. And that's going to be the Model 69. The 69 is in 44 Magnum. And unlike a lot of other 44 Magnum revolvers that we'll get to, like the Ruger Red Hawk, which is a good gun, it's not as big. It's not as beefy. it's still that similar size. Now you get 5 rounds, but it's 5 rounds of 44 versus 6 rounds of 357. Now, if this was going to be my carry gun in an urban, suburban environment, I'm going to be honest, I don't think I would carry it in 44 Magnum. But 44 Special is no slouch, and 44 Special is a really good defensive cartridge. Nothing wrong with it. It's not commonplace. It's not 9mm. It's not even 45 ACP as far as common, but 44 Special is a legit defensive round. There's nothing wrong with 44 Special. And that medium-sized gun with 44 Special, I imagine it's pretty controllable and easy to shoot. Also, if this was going to be like your one handgun, right, you kind of wanted one handgun, it's also a great choice for hunting. 44 Magnum is great for that. I don't think it's as good a choice as like a 7 or so inch Ruger Super Red Hawk, but that gun's not nearly as good as a carry gun. So again, you give up a little bit, but if you wanted a good all-around handgun that would do all kinds of stuff and you gravitated more towards 44 than 357, that Model 69 is a really intriguing choice. Weighing in at 37 ounces, that's not bad for a carryable size gun. That's again lighter than a 1911. Plenty of people carry 1911s. And what you're getting there is a big bore capability in a carryable size handgun. Now, again, if I was carrying this in an urban, suburban environment, mostly for defense against people, I would not carry it with 44 mag because you're giving up a lot in shot recovery time. I've never shot that gun in 44 mag, but I've shot plenty of handguns and revolvers in varying calibers. And just from the weight, the power to weight ratio on that, I own a Scandium frame 357 that's one of my covert carry guns. It's not my daily carry gun, but I carry it not infrequently. I'm familiar with how that kicks in 357. This gun is quite a bit heavier, but it's also going to 44 Magnum. I wouldn't carry it for defense against people, mostly in 44 Magnum, because I don't care how good you control recoil. If you reduce it, you can shoot faster, getting your rounds on target. If it's for bear defense or something, that's a different matter. If it's for hunting, different matter. But if it's for defense against people, you may have multiple attackers. You may need to transition. You may need to get back on target quickly. Whereas if a bear is on top of me and it's bear defense, wherever that muzzle goes, as long as it's soft and it's not me, probably pulling the trigger. But where you actually have to hit an adversary that's more than a couple of feet away, I'm going to want that shot recovery time. So I'd probably carry it in 44 Special. But it gives you that option. Again, if you wanted to go hunting with it, and you want to just be really familiar. What's that saying? Beware the man that carries one gun. If you wanted that one handgun, that would do pretty much everything. Right, that Model 69. Not so big that you probably wouldn't carry it. At least no bigger than a full-size combat semi-auto. You got 5 rounds of either 44 Special or 44 Magnum. Super flexible, especially if you hand load. But even if you don't, there's a lot of good 44 Special loads, a lot of good 44 Magnum loads, all the way from your mild 44 Special to your really hot 44 Magnums. And it's kind of unique in that way that it's that size and handles 44 Magnum. I think it's a really cool gun. Now getting into the big bores that are big revolvers, like bigger than you're probably going to carry year-round in most environments. Like there might be the one guy that lives in a really cold climate and carries a big jacket and wears a Ruger Red Hawk. But most people aren't going to carry that day to day. But that's where I'm going to go next. Going back to Ruger. Ruger and 44 Mag have kind of had this long storied love affair. 44 Magnum is one of those cartridges that Ruger does a lot, and they do it well. All the way, getting off the revolver topic, but going to the Deerfield carbine. Phenomenal short-range hunting gun. Phenomenal brush gun. Just amazing. I wish they would come back out with that in stainless. And P.S., come back out with it in stainless in 357. But a semi-automatic carbine like that, phenomenal. But they have a long history with the 44 Magnum. They make the 77 44, a bolt-action 44 Magnum. I think unlike a lot of other companies, they see it as a legit hunting cartridge. And again, their revolvers are made beefy, and their 44 Magnum revolvers are made really beefy. The Red Hawk, we'll talk about the Super Red Hawk in a minute, but the Red Hawk is a really, really good, robust, beefy revolver. They make the hunting versions. They make them in all manner of sizes. If, again, you're probably not carrying this. So if I were getting like a Red Hawk and it was mostly for hunting, if it wasn't for strictly bear defense or something, I'd go with a longer barrel. I'd go with that 7-ish, 6 or longer barrel. But a phenomenal big bore gun. If you want to go a little bit bigger and a little bit beefier still, you might go with the Ruger Super Red Hawk. I believe the vast majority of these that are the full-size versions come with scope mounting options. They come with scope rings, which is something Ruger does. That's nice. They include scope rings in a lot of their guns, where a lot of other companies do not. But if you're looking for a good hunting revolver, Ruger Super Red Hawk. Also, the Super Red Hawk, you can move up to the 454 Casull. That's a really flexible cartridge because you can also load 45 Colt, or 45 Long Colt, as it's commonly called. And that's a really good cartridge. But 454 Casull is really good. And it's still a manageable size. I'm not going to talk today, best revolvers. I'm not going to talk about the X-frames. Not that they're not good, well-built revolvers. Again, Smith & Wesson makes a really well-built revolver. But to me, just in handling them and dealing with them, they're almost comically big to me. They're bigger. At that point, I'm hunting with a handgun because it's a handgun in name only. I generally won't shoot it or anything the way I'll traditionally shoot a normal handgun. Whereas like a Super Red Hawk is right on that line. A Super Red Hawk I can still handle, still carry in a holster, still draw, still basically stance, grip, and stuff is pretty similar. Those, giant 500 Smith & Wesson X-frames are really cool guns. If you want one, I'm not putting that down. But to me, they're too big to be a practical handgun for most things. And if you're hunting with one of those, you're probably hunting with it because you want to say you hunt with a handgun. It's a handgun kind of in name only. It's very different than most other handguns of normal size. Not that it's a bad gun, but I'm not going to really get into that. But for a good, kind of the biggest of that line, the Ruger Super Red Hawk. And you get it in 44 Magnum, you get it in 454 Casull, whatever you want. It's a fantastic gun. If you don't want anything quite that big, you want to stick with the iron sights, the more traditional, I would say more manageable size, the Ruger Red Hawk is a phenomenal choice. Those are really good options in big bores. Now let's go from really big to really little. The small, what you might call a snub nose or pocket revolver. And just like I didn't really consider the X-frame Smith & Wessons for the big bores, I'm not really going to consider the Ruger SP101 for these. Because a big reason a lot of people carry these is because they're light and they're handy. Again, Ruger tends to overbuild a lot of their guns. They're steel, they're metal revolvers. The SP101 is a really good, robust, little small snub nose, but it's heavy. If I'm going to carry a gun that heavy, probably not carrying it in my pocket. I'm probably carrying it on my belt. And if I'm going to carry it on my belt, I'm probably going to go with a bigger revolver or a bigger handgun. That's just me, right? Your threshold might be different. Maybe you have different constraints, different things. But the reason I like the snub nose revolver is because I can easily pocket carry it. And if I'm carrying on a belt, I probably go with a slightly bigger revolver. That's just me. So I'm not going to include the SP101, although it is a good gun. Not a good gun for me for this purpose. But Ruger does make a really good snub nose revolver in the LCR. It was kind of one of the big innovations. We think of revolvers as kind of this old, antiquated thing that don't really change. But Ruger kind of changed that with the LCR. I think that stands for a lightweight compact revolver, but it's got a polymer or quasi-semi-polymer frame depending on the caliber. It also has quite a different trigger mechanism. To the end user, people say they like it better. I would say it's just different than your normal Smith & Wesson trigger, but it's a good trigger on the LCR, especially double action. It's a good trigger. It's still a double action revolver trigger, but it's pretty smooth, pretty linear. You can get the LCR Rex. I'm not getting into that debate. I prefer hammers. I even prefer hammers on my snub-nose pocket guns. And I know all the tactical reasons why people will disagree with that. And I know that I'm in the minority. And I'm not telling you should carry one. But I don't like giving up that single action capability for the chance that there may be a potential issue with the hammer. And I've been carrying, try to think about this, I think I've been carrying a snub-nose revolver either as a backup gun or concealed carry gun. Not as my primary, but again, I do carry it quite a bit as a covert still for 17 years. And I wouldn't trade the single action capability for the off chance. Just the way that I grab the gun, the way that it sits in the holster in the pocket, I don't fret about the fact that it has a hammer. But if you want the hammer or not, you can go with the LCR or the LCRX. Really good. Again, if I'm going with this, I'm probably still going with 38 Special 357. Probably carrying it with 38 Specials, but if you want the 357 Magnum option, not a big deal there. You can go with either one. They also make it in 22 long rifle. They make it in 22 Magnum. I'm sure they make it in other calibers. I'm not mentioning every caliber, but it's a good pocket snub nose option, that Ruger LCR. Now, I should mention that they also make it in 9mm. Now, to be fair, if I was going to get one of these and carry it, I would get it in 38 Special 357 Magnum. I already have other guns. I already am familiar with that caliber. I already stock that caliber. And I think there's a lot of really good reasons to get a revolver and a revolver cartridge. The rim, the extraction, all manner of things. The engineering, all that stuff favors the 38 Special 357. But if you said that, hey, I'm just not a revolver guy, I only plan to have this one snub nose because I see the advantages of a snub nose pocket revolver over a semi-auto, that's the way I want to go, but I don't want to get into revolver cartridges. I don't want to get into another cartridge. I'm a 9mm guy. I would say, okay, get it in 9mm. Nothing wrong with that. So you get that option in the LCR. Now, the other big one I'm going to recommend for pocket snub nose is the J-frame. And that's the number one recommendation I would give. They've been around for so long. I'm looking over at the first handgun that I purchased with my own money. Talking about carrying a snub nose J-frame, not all the time, but this morning to take the dog out to go to the bathroom, grabbed a pocket knife, grabbed my Smith & Wesson J-frame that I got as a backup gun as a police officer. Again, carried it this morning. I think it's like 17 years old. First handgun I bought with my own money. The Beretta 92 that the military issued me, obviously I didn't buy, and the duty gun for LAPD I didn't buy. They issued that to me. And friends and family had handguns growing up, but my own personal one. And I'm looking at it right now. It's still a good carry gun. I'm not going to act like I haven't broken it or had to send it back to the factory, but I use things pretty hard. They make a ton of models, and I'm not going down the Smith & Wesson model rabbit hole. My personal favorite is the 360 PD. That's a lightweight scandium frame 357. Again, if you're talking defense against people, I recommend you carry it in 38 Special. Maybe 38 Special plus P. I don't recommend 357, but I don't just do that. Professional big game hunting and guiding, in places with both kinds of bear, places like that as a backup gun for hunting. Also, I like the option as a prepper, as a survivalist, and I don't apologize for that. We've all lived through ammo shortages, right? If you're old enough to legally own a gun and you're listening to this podcast, you've lived through ammo shortages. Probably 2 big ones in our lifetime. It gives me another option of what I can shoot. Not just 38 Special. What if I can only get 357 Magnum? I can shoot either caliber out of it. And I will tell you that shooting 357 Magnum out of a Scandium J-frame revolver, mine weighs 11 point something ounces. I think that's the factory spec on it. It is no fun. It is a beast. I would much rather shoot a Ruger Super Red Hawk in 454 Casull a lot. But it has that option. That's my favorite one. There's also the 340 if you prefer a hammerless model, but probably more common and just fine for most people and quite a bit less expensive. It's just going to be your Smith & Wesson Airweight, which is not Scandium, but it's fairly light, 38 Special. And again, there's lots of different models. I prefer the hammer. A lot of people, I'm in the minority in that, and I'm okay with that. I'm not telling you that you have to get one with a hammer and you're silly if you don't. If you want a hammerless model, then get the hammerless model. I like the ability for single action trigger pulls, and I've used that. I like that capability. But if you decide you want a hammerless one, I'm not going to knock that. They also have the humpback, and I don't know what the actual name is, but when you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's probably the most practical because it has an exposed hammer that you can cock, but it's designed in such a way as to not get snagged. I just think, honestly, they're really ugly. And the hammer doesn't bother me. But that is an option. If you don't care about looks at all, you want kind of the ugly duckling of the Smith & Wesson J-frame world, those humpback designs are really good practical design. But for a snub nose pocket carrier revolver in that kind of size, I'm not saying they're the only two, the LCR and the J frame, but why? Why pick anything else unless it's just what you have, or you're really on a budget and you get a Taurus or a Rossi or something? And some of those can be just fine. Some of them can have quite a few issues. It's, the quality control, at least in years past. Maybe it's gotten better. But if you come to me for a snub nose pocket revolver, I'm going to probably go J frame or LCR if you want one of those. If you don't, you're really going to have to justify to me why what you choose is better than an LCR or a J-frame. There are others, but the LCR and the J-frame are really kind of it. Talking about that snub nose, really small J-frame size, or SP101 size, or LCR size, like that 5-shot 38 special size. Smith & Wesson will call it a J-frame. That kind of size, that SP101, Ruger LCR, just a thing that I don't generally do, but I could see the merits of it. If you wanted a frame that size with a slightly longer barrel, like the J-frame, generally snub nose has a sub 2-inch barrel. But if you wanted to get one with a longer barrel, make the SP101s and the J-frames with longer barrels, like a 3-inch or even longer barrel. If you wanted it for belt carry, an SP101 with, a slightly longer barrel, or a J-frame with a longer barrel, or they make the LCR and the LCRX with that kind of mid-sized barrel length, and you're getting a smaller frame, a smaller cylinder, sleeker, thinner, which for concealed carry can be a big thing. If you wanted that as a good compact revolver belt carry option, and you didn't want to go all the way to the K-frame or the L-frame, you might look at those. Just a kind of a subcategory there. Not a main category, but a really cool idea. Anyway, those are my thoughts for some of the best revolvers available today in the different, what I would consider the big three categories. I hope you enjoyed this episode on revolvers, on wheel guns, 6-shooters, whatever you want to call them. If I didn't mention your favorite, you really like a defensive revolver in .22 Magnum, or, you're the guy that's all about .327 Federal, that's okay. I'm trying to stick to number one recommendations for big categories, but those are fine things too. With that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. These episodes where I talk about the best in every category per my opinion, they tend to do pretty well. And I'm here to serve you guys, so hopefully you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, easy thing to do, reach down, leave a review, make sure you're subscribed. If you're listening to this on Spotify, there should be a little question there. What's your go-to carry gun? Answer that. I don't know that it helps me at all, but it helps the community out. Let people know what you're carrying. And again, leave a review. Make sure you're subscribed. If you listen to more than one episode, you probably like the show, which I'm humbled by. Hopefully you'll consider subscribing. And a big part of why I do this show is because I want good, strong, godly men to be well armed. The Gospel of Luke, let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. I don't apologize for spreading the word of making godly men strong and strong men godly and well armed and well trained. I don't apologize for that. If that's the message you want to support and contribute to, consider becoming a patron. GoodShepherdTraining.com, or there should be a link in the show notes. You can also contact me at GoodShepherdTraining.com. You want to check out Patreon. Most of that stuff is only for patrons. They support the show. But there's some stuff on there, pictures and stuff, and different things that you can see that's open to the public. So if you want to check that out on Patreon, there should be a link in the show notes. As a thanks for listening to all that, probably ready for a tactical tip of the day. Now, for your tactical tip of the day, speaking of Patreon, this came out of Patreon recently. One of the patrons was asking about best lubrication for gun lube, especially they live in a maritime environment, real salty area. And so the topic came up, and I give you some of my recommendations for over the years using all kinds of stuff. I like the Rand CLP. The CLP is good. There's some military stuff is good. The Rand CLP is the non-toxic stuff. And I like that if you're going to be handling guns all the time on a daily basis. It's kind of that stuff adds up, right? So the Rand CLP, I like it. But just the, military kind of break-free CLP is good too. It's a good all-around thing if you're going to have like one thing for your bug out bag or one thing for your kit, your range bag that'll do pretty much anything. That's what the CLP is designed for. Clean, lubricate, and protect. Here's one that I really like if you're looking for something real thick and viscous for, not revolvers. No, don't put in your trigger mechanism on your revolver. But for your slides and your barrel to slide lockup and your slide to frame, Hyperlube. It's an auto thing. It's like a additive for engine oil, and it works good for that, but it's really, really thick and viscous, and it works really good on that, like minimizing that high wear areas on a handgun or on some long guns too, like that barrel hood lockup area, the slide to frame. You know, that stuff is so slick, it makes a Glock feel smooth. It's really good. And a little bit goes a long way, and it's, again, for auto engine. So you get a bottle of that, it should last you a long, long time. Also really good, as long as you're not in a super cold environment, for the bolts on an AR-15. So if you're going to like a high round count training class, you're going to be shooting a lot of rounds in a day. It's just really, really thick and viscous, and it tends to stay in an area a long time. And again, that's Hyperlube. Really, really good for those kind of bigger metal-to-metal contact areas. I don't use it on trigger mechanisms and stuff like that. That I prefer like a Rem oil or, again, the CLP, something a little bit finer. I also really like the Lucas gun oil. Again, Lucas is an auto manufacturer lubricant thing, but the lubricant is good too. It's like a little blue lubricant. It's a fine lubricant, but what I like about it is the application bottle that it comes in. It comes in like that little blue bottle syringe type. They may make other size bottles, but the little syringe one with the small, fine metal applicator. That's great for when you want a drop or two. Because if you're talking about a trigger mechanism, or especially on a revolver working parts, there is a thing, especially on a carry gun, a pocket gun, of too much lube. That little fine applicator lets me put 1 or 2 drops where I want it. I don't have a bunch of leaky lube spilling out or attracting dirt, attracting dust. I like that Lucas oil mostly for the applicator. And there's plenty of other gun lubes out there, but if you're looking for recommendations on gun lubrication stuff, and if you want high volume, big stuff, just whatever viscosity you want, in synthetic motor oil. Right? Synthetic motor oil is a great lubricant. Think about the abuse that a piston in an engine takes. Right? So don't think that, especially if you're using it on stuff you shoot all the time and lube all the time. Like if I'm lubing guns up for storage, a gun that I'm not going to shoot for a while, and you're going to put a big thick coat on a lot of metal parts, just synthetic motor oil. It's a good thing. It's a good affordable thing. It's not the cheapest thing, but when you compare to getting a quart of it versus getting a couple of ounces of dedicated gun oil, you may consider that as an option. Just some good tactical tips there on gun lube. With that, your tactical verse of the day. From the prophet Isaiah, no weapon formed against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and this is their vindication from me, declares the Lord. I'm going to read the first part of that again. No weapon forged against you will prevail. And a similar verse. If God is for us, who can be against us? Anyway, with that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.